That strips my conscience bare, it's witchcraft. And I've got...
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. My name is Richard Clark, and for Superstition Sundays, for this Sunday I'm going to talk about the origins of Halloween. I'm going to talk about the origins of All Saints' Day, Day of the Dead, and also before that I'm going to talk about the origins of witches and witchcraft. So witches and the idea of this, there's a lot of myths going on, but I'm going to explain the actual origins of it. So for starters, origins of witches. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft, used magic spells and called upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be being pagans, doing the devil's work. However, most of them were simply natural healers or so-called wise women whose choice of profession was misunderstood. Now we've got to remember that paganism and religion there's this clash, and the idea of paganism is seen as occult practices, but actually most religious leaders, practitioners, actually would get advice from pagan witches or women who actually were called wise women. It's unclear exactly where witches came on the historical scene. One of the first early records written is actually in the Bible, on the book of Samuel, thought to be written between 931 BC and 721 BC. It tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. The witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's sons died in battle and Saul committed suicide. There are other Old Testament verses condemn witches, such as the oft-cited Exodus 22-18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Additional biblical passages caution against deviation, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. So this is where the idea of when we talk about deviation, when it's linked to tarot, deviation when it's linked to mediumship, chanting, or using wise women to contact the dead. But if you think about it, mediums can do that, if people believe in that. Some people believe they can use spirit guides to help them. It is not witchcraft. It is actually something we all can do. It's just that how we use it. But the main hysteria really took hold in Europe during the mid-1400s, which was what we call medieval times, when many accused witches confessed, often under extreme torture, to a variety of wicked behaviours. These actual tortures were things as basically putting a witch on a chair and they would literally drown them in water until they literally came up for air if they didn't drown. They would burn people, all sorts. Within that century, witch hunts were common, and most of the accused were executed by burning at the stake or hanging. Single women, widows and other women on the margins of society were especially targeted. So considering that we have now a more of single womenhood in our society, widows and other women who are on the margins of society, so that would be seen as maybe prostitutes, people who didn't get married, maybe people who would now be part of the LGBT movement. Between the years 1500 and 1660, up to 80,000 suspected witches were put to death in Europe. Around 80% of them were women thought to be in the cahoots with the devil and filled with lust. And the actual highest country of that time to actually kill witches was Germany. And Ireland had the lowest. So actually in Ireland, witchcraft is actually seen as a good thing. It actually is in Spain as well. Anyway, there was also a publication of a book written by two respected German Dominicans, which is these are people who were in the dominion of the church, likely spurred witch mania to go viral. The book, usually translated as The Hammer of Witches, were essentially a guide on how to identify, hunt and interrogate witches. These labelled witchcraft as heresy and quickly became the authority for Protestants and Catholics trying to flush out witches living among them. And more for 100 years, these books sold more copies than any other book in Europe except the Bible. So again, this idea of the Protestants and Catholics trying to flush out witches living among them, again, it was always to do with the church were afraid of them. Now, in America, very famous thing is called the Salem witch trials. As witch hysteria decreased in Europe, it grew in the New World, which is where obviously a lot of people reading from wars between the French and British, a smallpox epidemic, an ongoing fear of attacks from neighbourhood Native American tribes. The tense atmosphere was ripe for finding scapegoats. Probably the best known witch trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts, in Boston in 1692. Now the Salem witch trials begin with a 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began suffering from fits, body contortions and uncontrolled screaming. Today it's believed they were poisoned by fungus that cause spasms and delusions. But as more young women began to exhibit symptoms, mass hysteria ensued and 3 women were accused of witchcraft. These 3 women were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne and Tituba. I think I've got that right. She was an enslaved woman owned by Paris's father. So again, this is actually where then the idea of Tituba confessed to being a witch and began accusing others of using black magic. So the idea of this is where the word black magic comes from as well. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop became the first accused witch to be put to death during the Salem witch trials when she was hanged at the Salem gallows. Ultimately, around 150 people were accused and 18 were put to death. Women weren't the only victims of the Salem witch trials. 6 men were also convicted and executed. So the idea of actual witchcraft is not just due to women, but obviously mainly read in the idea of medieval times of England. If someone could do magic, they were a wizard, like Merlin the wizard, who was King Arthur's associate. In Virginia, people were less frantic about witches. In fact, in Lower Norfolk County, 1654-5, a law was passed making it a crime to falsely accuse some of witchcraft. Still, witchcraft was a concern. About 24 witchcrafts, mostly of women, took place in Virginia between 1626 and 1730. None of the accused were executed. So, also we've got to remember that the pilgrims from England, when they went to the New World, actually then also caused their own idea of witchcraft as well. So that actually was where you've got to understand that the English who moved to America were also some of the most backward people, weren't very educated and did a lot of damage. So other famous witchcraft trials is in Virginia history is Grace Sherwood, whose neighbours alleged she killed their pigs and hexed their cotton, and this got Sherwood brought to trial. There was another thing also where they said Sherwood's arms and legs were bound and she was thrown into a body of water. It was thought if she sank, she was innocent. If she floated, she was guilty. Sherwood didn't sink and was convicted of being a witch. She wasn't killed but put in prison and for 8 years. Also, a satirical article, supposedly written by Benjamin Franklin, about a witch trial in New Jersey was published in 1730 in the Pennsylvanian Gazette. It brought to light the ridiculous nature of some witchcraft accusations. It wasn't long before the witch mania died down in the New World and laws were passed to help protect people who were wrongly accused and convicted. But the modern day witches of the Western world still struggle to shake that historical stereotype. Most practice Wicca, an official religion in the United States and Canada. Wicca avoid evil and the appearance of evil at all costs. Their motto is to harm none, and they strive to live a peaceful, tolerant and balanced life in tune with nature humanity. Many modern day witches still perform witchcraft, but there's seldom anything sinister about it. Their spells and incantations are often derived from their Book of Shadows, a 20th century collection of wisdom, and witchcraft can be compared to the act of prayer in other religions. Modern day witchcraft potion is more likely to be a herbal remedy for the flu instead of a hex to harm someone. And again, today's witchcraft spells are usually used to stop someone from doing evil or harming themselves. Ironically, while it's probable some historical witches use witchcraft for evil purposes, many may have embraced it for healing or protection against the immortality they were accused of. But witches, whether actual or accused, still face persecution and death. Several men and women suspected of witchcraft have been beaten and killed in Papua New Guinea since 2010, including a young mother who was burned alive. Similar episodes of violence against people accused of being witches have occurred in Africa, South America, the Middle East, and in immigrant communities in Europe and the United States. In literature, to explain another thing about history of witches, witchcraft was described in the book Macbeth, and that's where we get the idea of the Halloween idea of cauldron, boil and trouble, and all the ideas of the spells. That was actually Macbeth had heard these rumours about these witches, and Shakespeare actually created this in the book. And if you actually read the book of Macbeth, the idea is they say that the witches had the premonition of what had happened to Macbeth, and they were the ones who led him to his ambition, his fault of his ambition, for him to die. But the witches actually always were warning him at the same time, which is also why the book is very important, because it's about the idea of that if you try and use spells or magic or shortcuts, that it will actually end in your death or end up in something where you end up in a bad situation. Now, the idea of modern day witchcraft, outside of what I've just explained, is that the idea of witches also are herbal people, herbal medicine people, and so forth. And there are many people who have got backgrounds of witches in their blood, or actually have them in their lineage. So if anybody does anything like tarot, or does anything like healing or anything like that, they may have the actual trials of witches within their lineage. Also, we also can look at this as well as other people who've been cast as witches or healers, or also as demonized, would be the Romany gypsies, or any sorts of gypsies, which are Basque gypsies from Spain. Romany gypsies originally are said from Romania, but they're actually from India of origin. And this goes on and on and on. But the idea of witchcraft and witches is actually mainly based on myth of old superstitions which people have been brainwashed to do. And the other idea as well is also where people should be worried about their language, is when you actually use the word bitches or bitch to a woman, which is another word for a female dog, it's also you're actually casting, like you're casting a spell, that they are actually to be ostracized. So the idea of bitches is not that far from the idea of witches. It's the idea that women who have power, or they can manipulate a situation, that is what they're termed as. So something to be wary of. Anyway, next post all about Halloween, All Saints Day and Day of the Dead.
That strips my conscience bare, it's witchcraft.